And it's time. So, my name is Nate, and I'm codependent. I got into recovery from codependency in July of 1986, right here in Phoenix. I'll talk more about circumstances, but let's see. To me, it's a big deal to be back here on the 30th anniversary. Not only am I happy to reconnect and be at another international conference. I was at the first one in 1987 and helped in the hospitality suite then, but I haven't been to any other international conferences. So being here is feels important to me, and I'm really looking forward to. I'm hopeful of seeing people that I know. I've already connected with one good friend who's here with us this morning, and he's still living here in Phoenix, and I haven't seen him in quite a long time until today. And there are, a few people that I know are still involved, like Ken and Mary, but I didn't know how to get in touch with very many people ahead of time, and so that's just a hope that I've just had to kind of put out there to the universe and see what comes from it. I'm grateful and happy to see each of you that's here, to hear whatever it is I have to say, whatever it turns out, whatever it is that I end up saying. I have a bunch of notes which I'll try to follow. And I think that I thought about different ways of approaching this. So I thought I'd just start by talking about hi, come on in. My experience is everybody gets started in recovery because they're at a bottom. And I thought I'd start with telling you about the conditions of my bottom. What got me going. And by the way, I want to tell you right now, a little disclaimer for me. In 30 years of recovery, I've become much more comfortable with my feelings, and some of them are likely to come out this morning. So I'll just don't be shocked or surprised. I won't be shocked or surprised, and try to struggle on and not let them interfere too much. But yeah, and it would be good to close that door, I think. Oh, more chair thieves. Okay. So what brought me to my bottom was alcoholism, and I was cheating on my wife. And I had a very poor relationship with my children, a son and a daughter. I had lots of shame. I was controlled by a lot of repressed anger at my dad. I acted out angrily much of the time. If somebody wanted to know what I felt, that was the one thing I could be sure I was feeling. I was angry all the time. I was really struggling with life, but trying to maintain a good appearance. I still had a good job. A house, 2 cars in the garage, all that happy stuff, and trying to smile. Had a successful job, good financial security. Tried to keep everything looking good on the outside, but inside, the harder I tried to keep it looking good on the outside, the inside I just felt worse and worse and worse all the time, and finally got to that bottom. I didn't really know who I was, but I was too sick to even recognize that, because I don't think I ever had known who I was. So I didn't miss it. I didn't know what I didn't have. The events, that was my condition. So the events was that I was caught in my infidelity, and I felt really hopeless because it was the second time. And I had told my wife, made a lot of excuses, a lot of promises to her, and so when it happened again and I got caught again, I just felt like she'll never believe me. How will I ever repair this relationship? In fact, I really started questioning, was there even anything there to repair? And I was so out of touch with any feelings. I could chase myself around in my head a lot, think a lot of different ideas, but I didn't really know what to do or how to make things any better. So I thought I just needed to quit that marriage and try to start over. All the previous assurances I'd given my wife didn't hold up and just turned out to be lies. So I felt like I was perceived as a liar by her especially. So I came up with a plan to work through that. I was too chicken to come to her directly and say what conclusion I'd arrived at. So I tried to find a therapist to help me soft sell it to her under the guise of marriage counseling. And that was a big mistake because I found the wrong therapist. That was the beginning of the end of my past life. My life started to change right then. I still remember these names. I don't know how many of you live around here and would recognize any of these names. And they may be immaterial, but that therapist's name was Virgie Behrens, and I consider her my first angel. I've met a lot of angels in recovery, and I consider an angel to be someone who is there with the information I need at the time that I need it and shares it with me, and it changes my life. So I've had that experience a number of times. Turns out this therapist had a lot of experience with alcoholics. She had actually married and divorced 3 alcoholics. And the one that she was married to at that time was in recovery and was in fact a doctor at St. Luke's Hospital and had organized and started up their treatment program at St. Luke's. He was responsible for that. So in order for it came up during the counseling sessions with my wife that if it was going to do any good, I needed to stop drinking. And what happened was after about 6 weeks of not drinking, I had a feeling. Imagine that. And it shocked me. It surprised me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't recognize it. And I had to just be with it for a while. And I realized that there were 2 things. I remembered how I felt about my wife when we first met, when we got married. We were both in college. And I also felt another feeling I was fairly familiar with, a lot of fear that I was going to lose that. And I didn't want to lose it. So my attitude changed to one of being willing to do whatever I could to save the marriage. But I did fear that it was beyond hope, and I just willing to do whatever I could. So my wife was having some individual sessions with the therapist for a while, and the therapist told her, you could divorce Nate, but you'll marry another alcoholic. Well, my wife was not that convinced about recovery and all this stuff yet, so I know my wife well enough, and she shared that. She said, yeah, you think so, but not me. I wouldn't do that. But she said, and what's more, so will your daughter. Well, that hooked her big time. Because our daughter was in college and was drinking and having some difficulties. And so that convinced my wife that she needed to go to St. Luke's treatment program. And the cool thing was that they were delivering it inpatient and outpatient. And the outpatient was done in several little satellite locations scattered around the valley here. One of them was just a couple miles from our house. And the idea there was that whoever was the designated addict that needed treatment could go, but being hopefully close to where they lived, family members could come as well. Because they treated addiction as a family problem. They understood that. And that it was a symptom, not a disease. So, my wife started going, and a curious, ironic twist to it is there was no insurance coverage for codependence then. We're talking 30 years ago. The only way my health insurance would pay for treatment for anybody in the family is if they were an addict or alcoholic. So my wife says, okay, I'll be the alcoholic and I'll go to treatment and we'll just see what comes. That way it was close to home, and this was in the summer. Our daughter was home from college, so she took our daughter along. And after a few weeks, and I wasn't going because I was too busy, had too many important things to do, especially in the evenings. So the interesting thing was when Virgie, the therapist, told us first that she thought I was an alcoholic, and my reaction was, well, you're entitled to your opinion, of course, but I disagree. I just happen to think that it's okay for me to drink whatever I want in any amount I want, anywhere I want, anytime I want. But I'm not an alcoholic. Alcohol was not part of my problem. It was all this other stuff that was going on. It never occurred to me that alcohol would have anything to do with my ability to deal with those things. It took me a while to learn that. So we went to get a second opinion. She said, well, the therapist says, if you want a second opinion, go talk to the counselor that leads this outpatient group out there in your neighborhood. So we had an appointment with him, sat down, told him what was going on. He says, yeah, I agree. I think you're an alcoholic too. And I think you'd enjoy our program because we invite all the family members to come and we talk about all the interactions and effects in the family. And the interesting thing was, the things he was talking about were things I'd never heard before in my life, because I grew up in a very, very dysfunctional family. There was, I'll probably get more into that later, but what happened in my family was my dad told everybody what to do. I was the oldest son, so I was first in line for all that stuff. And if you didn't do what he said, he took measures to make sure that in the future when he said that, you would do it. And if there were, the transgressions really varied a lot. It's probably a good time to mention. There were times when I would absolutely get the hell beat out of me for something that I thought was fairly minor, and other times when I did something that I thought I was really going to catch hell for, just slid right on by. Nothing happened. Well, the explanation for that came later on after my dad died, many years down the road. My mom mentioned to me at the funeral reception that she believed he'd been a prescription drug addict ever since World War II. I was born in 1944, so he was away in Corsica at the time, and he came back with PTSD, went off to an R&R camp, and that's apparently where it all started, and followed through with the VA all through the years. So when she said that about being a drug addict, popped into my head right away. Mood swings. No wonder life was so crazy. No wonder I couldn't figure out what was going on. It wasn't because of what I was doing. It was because of what was going on in his crazy head. And I'd been in recovery a number of years when that happened, when he died, and she said that. And so it made a lot of sense to me. It had a lot of significance then. So anyway, going back to Scottsdale and St. Luke's outpatient program, after I wasn't going, but a couple weeks into it, my wife called me at work and said, would you come tonight? Because I'd already let her know that I'd had this feeling and realized I was about to lose something very precious to me, and I would do whatever I could to try to help restore our relationship. So she called me and said, would you be willing to come to the treatment session tonight and hear our daughter's first step? And I said, well, okay. I thought about it, and all these really important things. I was at my office working late, and I figured all these really important things could wait one day. So I went. And the counselor treated me like his long-lost brother. He sat me down. He says, we've been waiting for you. Gave me this stack of books that each of the people that was attending there was issued when they signed up. And says, you can have these, take them with you. And I listened to our daughter's first step, which took something less than an hour, but the whole session for that evening was 2.5 or 3 hours. I don't remember exactly which. And I just stayed there and listened, and I would, again, hearing things that I'd never heard before. about how to live. How to live. I was really in a survival environment growing up, and I'd learned a lot of things about survival. Well, I'd taken on a lot of survival behaviors and attitudes. I wouldn't say I really learned anything. But I was starting to hear things about how to live. And it really, really hooked me. I just loved it. I ate it up. So went ahead and one day at a time I kept going back. I never signed up or committed, but one day at a time I went to that treatment program. And somewhere during the course of that, got started going to AA meetings. And continued to do that the rest of the time that I lived in Phoenix. At this point in time, I'd never heard of CODA, and hardly anybody else had. CODA was just forming at that time. So after we completed that program, my wife and I did their aftercare program. It was one night a week for a year, where the couples went together and talked, and there was a couple of alumni from that were facilitators. During this time, we really put our marriage on hold. We still lived in the same house, but we interacted with each other very minimally. We had somewhere through all this gotten the idea that we needed to really work on ourselves first. Well, it was the counselor at that program, now that I think of it. I can see him standing in front of us talking about how so many codependent couples get the cart before the horse, so to speak, and try to push the horses with the cart, and the horses go off in different directions, and it doesn't work. So we understood that we needed to work on ourselves, try to figure out who we are, what our issues were, get some healing, and get a little traction in this whole process before we tried to get serious about looking at our relationship or even being in a marriage. Even just put that whole thought on hold. And it was something over a year before we got back to it. So at the end of aftercare, the facilitator came to us and said, you guys seem pretty enthusiastic about this. You've been faithfully coming every week, and you participate. How would you like to be facilitators? Because we have a shortage of facilitators. So we said okay, and we talked about it together and decided. So we went and got the training for that and became facilitators. And so for the next 3 years or so, we facilitated aftercare ourselves. And that was a very important healing phase. We convened the aftercare group, and we sat everybody in a circle and saw what was going on with these other couples, and we saw ourselves in many of them. We observed the changes that they were making and the growth that was taking place with them, and it was very encouraging. And during this time, we actually started cooperating with each other, working together, and having some enthusiasm for what we were doing together. Another thing we started during that time was going to the monthly gratitude meetings at St. Luke's. Every month they have what they call a gratitude meeting, and they invite, or at least at that time, I'm out of touch with what they're doing right now, the alumni of whether it was their inpatient or outpatient to come down to a meeting, and they often would have someone give a presentation on some aspect of recovery. And so it was at one of those meetings where some people came in and talked about Codependence Anonymous. And it sounded pretty good, so we started looking up some CODA meetings and then attending. And then, the first international conference came up in '87, and that was fun. We enjoyed that. There were a whole series of important presentations there at St. Luke's, and we found that we both liked them because they were relevant to us. They were mostly on individual recovery, but they were meaningful to both of us. But after a while, the relationship issues came back as we started trying to relate to each other more. We started going back to the same mistakes we were making before we got into treatment. And so we decided it was time to get some help in that area. We had, along the way, met a local counselor who was recognized as being very helpful and expert in relationship counseling. So, and I don't know, if anybody knows or remembers Georgia Hearn, but she was a tremendous help to us. And so with that help, we went forward together, continuing to take in all the presentations that we could, because we were just like sponges, soaking up all this new information that was so different from anything we'd heard before in our life. And as much of it as we could assimilate and integrate, it seemed to be helping. It seemed to be not only helping the way we thought, the way we thought about ourselves, the way we thought about each other, the way we thought about the world, just helping a lot. So so I'm here to talk mostly about my recovery, but I want to just make mention that my wife's decision to embrace recovery at the same time has been tremendously beneficial and supportive for me. I come to understand that that's a very rare occurrence, and it's another one of the blessings that we've received in recovery. I'm very, very grateful for that. So I want to talk about then some key learnings or issues that we talked about, and some of these were brought up in those presentations at St. Luke's. But we did a lot of work about shame. That was probably the foremost issue, and came across a booklet from Hazelden called Shame Faced, and I think it's still available. When I read that, it was so profound. I felt like my life changed just from reading that book. I mean, I had a sense that it was understandable. What I was experiencing of life was understandable given the background that I came from, the environment that I was raised in. I didn't mention at this time, in case anybody doesn't understand, but I think this is a definition that John Bradshaw used in some of his things. The definition, or the way to tell a difference between a functional and a dysfunctional family. One of the criteria for a functional family is that the family system supports all the individuals and helps them to meet their needs so that they can grow and be happy and learn about life and learn to love and just go out into the world and be themselves and be self-actualized, self-realized. A dysfunctional family is one where all the individuals have to support the needs of the system. And this is where these dysfunctional family rules come up. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. We couldn't talk openly in our family at all. Certainly couldn't trust anybody in our family. And feelings were just not even anywhere in the consideration. It's one of the things, I never had a connection with my mom, but one of the things that even put kind of a exclamation point or made that more conclusive was one time as a adolescent or pre-adolescent, I couldn't go to sleep one night because I was afraid of dying. And what I reconstructed had happened around that time was it was about the time that she had had some stillbirth, two stillbirths, that 3 or 4 years apart. And I didn't know what to do with that. Nobody in the family talked about it. Certainly didn't talk about any feelings around it or tell us what to do as children. I have 4 siblings. So there was just a whole bunch of stuff running around in my head and feeling awkward and afraid and uneasy. And so I went to my mom and told her I was afraid of dying. And she says, well, I don't know if she actually used the word silly, but she said, you don't need to worry about that because God will take care of you. And she said, go back to bed, go to sleep. So that was the end of that. There was no comforting or nurturing, even when I got to the point where I felt I desperately needed it the most. So I knew it wasn't available. And that was the last time I asked, needless to say. So all this craziness in our family just left me ill-equipped. One of the things about trust is years later, my next younger brother was seeing a therapist who asked him to invite all his siblings to come meet with her so that we could tell her about our experience of growing up in that family, so that she could kind of corroborate and understand and have some context for what my brother was telling her. Well, interestingly enough, everybody agreed to go, and she had some special sessions set up for us on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon. First thing she asked us to do was go around and each in turn give their version of what growing up in our family was like. And the thing that I remember out of that was that every single one of the five of us thought that they were the one that was isolated from all the others, that all the others were closer. When I heard my siblings say that they felt the same way I did, I felt sad for them as well, but I thought, oh my God, no wonder. If that's the kind of environment we're in, and we all feel so isolated from each other, I mean, that was like, I could understand a lot of the other stuff that went on. That just sort of characterized it to me. It showed how we just couldn't communicate. We couldn't be present for each other or interact with each other in any kind of meaningful way. So, fast forward to meeting my wife and getting married, it doesn't work to be married that way. I found out, and I tried to make it work for, well, we got into recovery, we'd been married 23 years. So obviously, my wife had some background that prepared her to somehow tolerate that, but still, it didn't work well. It didn't, and it was about to not end well without CODA's and God's intervention. So, one of the other things, one of these meetings at St. Luke's, a local man, Fred Downing, been a Methodist minister for a while, had worked at the Meadows for a while. He was in private practice at that time. He did a presentation. One of the things he shared with us was about how all this negative thinking can be an obstacle in our mind. And he drew a circle on the blackboard, made a pie chart out of it, and he said, it's often thought, widely considered, that whatever amount of our mind is occupied with negative thinking, we probably need to use a comparable amount of our mind to keep a lid on that and keep it in balance. So I said, if you just pick a number like 20%, if 20% is negative and you need to take 20% of the rest to keep that in balance, you only have 20% left to work with, to understand life, grow, learn, whatever. So if that number is bigger, if it's 25% and it takes another 25%, now you're down to 10%. And I extrapolated that to my own experience and said, well, if that number is 30% or bigger, I think we call that overwhelmed, because that's where I felt I was. So that was very meaningful to me, that all this stuff that was running around in my head needed to be dealt with. That was a pivotal learning for me. Anger was something we talked about with and I went to therapy a lot once I got into recovery. And so I got some guidance on how to work out anger, because I had a ton of it. And somewhere, where it used to be out in the desert, 30 years ago, but there's probably a casita development sitting on top of where this old dead mesquite stump was, that I drove out away from myself, where nobody could hear me yell and scream and nobody could see how crazy I was acting. I had created a quote-unquote weapon, or a club, with some plastic pipe and rubber tubing, pipe insulation around it, so I could go and pound on something, and this mesquite stump, it was dead, looked like a good candidate. So I wailed on that stump for probably 45 minutes or an hour until that thing was in my hand was so short that if I tried to hit the stump again, I would hit my hand on it. And I had been counseled to be very careful not to hurt myself, pick a place where I wouldn't damage anything or hurt anybody else, especially not myself. So I stopped at that time, and I, had let the anger come up in waves, and I felt like I had processed all that was available to me at that time. But I also came prepared with a notebook and a pen, and I drove over and parked under a tree, and I wrote for about another 45 minutes or an hour. I said, I am angry at because. I am angry at because. I am angry at because. And most of it was about my dad and things that I could remember that he'd done, and general things about the way I felt he treated me, and a little bit about my mom for not intervening and things like that, or not being available when I needed emotional support. But that was very helpful for me because I got out a lot of anger. Now, it would be naive to claim that I got out all my anger then, but it got to a much more manageable point where it wasn't controlling me and dictating so much of my thoughts and my actions. So I'm very grateful for the guidance I got in doing that. Some of the other, there was also a session somebody gave us about love and trust, and how so often codependents confuse love and trust. We often talk about how much we love someone, I've heard other people. But when we find somebody we trust, we treat trust as a black and white issue, and very often tell our life story to this person we've decided we can trust, and sometimes later on come to regret that because we probably couldn't trust the person quite as much as we thought. So he said that in reality, the two are actually opposite. Love, he suggested, is a black and white thing, like being pregnant. Either we love somebody or we don't. What that doesn't say is how much action is motivated by that love, how we express it in our behavior, our words, anything else. But the basic feeling of love is either there or not there. And trust, on the other hand, is something that we need to make a choice about. Measure it out by taking risks, small risks at first, and when we find out that works out okay, the person upholds our trust for that little risk, then maybe being willing to risk a little bit more and letting the trust build incrementally, gradually, over time from our experience. And that was a big clarifier for me. I mean, that was something I really needed to know because I was very confused, and it helped me make a lot of sense out of life and relationships. Let's see. Another thing, some of these seem small, but somebody mentioned that sin is actually, if we go back to its original use, was not used the way that we think of it today in our common connotation, that actually was an archery term that meant to miss the mark. It's an error. It's not a, mortal catastrophe necessarily. And when I thought of it that way, I thought, I've missed the mark a lot, but as I learn and practice, I can keep shooting and maybe get closer and closer to the target. And so that was an important thing for me. The idea or the definition of the word perfect was an important thing for me as well. This is another one that didn't originally mean what we think of today very often, meaning without flaws. Perfect originally meant complete or whole. And as a human being, I'm going to have some flaws, and I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to miss the mark sometimes. But it's normal. That's normal for a human being. And so, if I don't allow myself to have any of those flaws, I'm not allowing myself to be human. I'm not accepting my humanity. In fact, to be perfect as a human being means including those that I would otherwise think of as imperfections or something like that. So learning to accept the wholeness of my personality, my humanness, was very important. These seem simple and elementary as I look back on them, but at that time they were profound to me because they were so different from what I'd learned as a child growing up and taken with me for years since then. When all this got started, I think I was 42 years old, and sad that it took that long, but it did. And I have to say that when the stuff finally came to me, I was ready. So I really started soaking it in and embracing it. One of the key presentations was one that talked about human beings versus human doings. And a little while into that, I recognized that I was a classic human doing. If somebody asked me who I was, I would tell them what I did and who I did it with, and maybe how often. But that's not who I am. That's what I do. I didn't know anything about who I was at that time. So fortunately, this presenter gave me the criterion and helped solve the problem. They said, who I am can be defined or described by what is true about me no matter what I'm doing. Still makes me pause. What are those things that are innate to me that are always true no matter what I'm doing? And if I didn't know any of them then, that doesn't mean they weren't true. It just means I need to get in touch with them and find out what they were. So she said, here's a little starter list for everybody. You might start by saying, I'm a worthwhile, precious, fallible human being. And then go on, as in recovery, being aware and looking for evidence and identifying the other things that are true. Now, worthwhile, precious, and fallible was quite a bit to stomach at that point in my life, because I was starting to feel like I might be worthwhile if I stayed with this recovery and did a bunch more work. I thought I was worthwhile, but I didn't think anybody else did. Come to find out that it's only really important what I think. Precious? I thought of precious gems or a precious baby, but thinking of myself as precious was a whole new thought for me. And she talked about how my life, my being, I need to recognize that it's precious to me. I'm the only one that can really take care of me in the ways that are most important. And so it's just appropriate to recognize my own preciousness and allow myself to be aware of that and behave in that way, treat myself in that way, doing all the best things I can for myself. And by the way, the other thing about that is that when I'm giving myself the very best care that I can, no matter what it is, I always have to remember, I do remember, I realize that I'm never taking anything away from anybody else. What I need to take care of me doesn't take anything away from anybody else. So if anybody complains that or responds, I'm not taking anything away from anybody else. I'm just taking care of me. So after, in addition to some of these things, at some point in time, partly based on the presentation I heard there at St. Luke's, I got in touch with Fred Downing, and I saw him individually for a while, and he told me about a weekend workshop that he did, which I then participated in, and it was I don't remember his name for it, we called it a self-recovery workshop. The idea being that many of us, myself included, were completely out of touch with ourselves. The reason for loneliness is being out of touch with ourselves. I came across a quote from Maxwell Maltz recently who said, if we're good friends with ourselves, we're never going to be lonely. Loneliness can't be cured or abated by having a bunch of people around us. Loneliness is only abated by being better in touch with myself. And significantly, being in touch with myself is where I learned to know a higher power and what a higher power meant to me. But I had to be in touch with myself to do that. So it's progression that I experienced. So I'm going to share what I learned in that, my own experience in that workshop had happened to myself, just as an illustration of what he meant. It says, a lot of us have, because of some trauma that happened early in our life, we have hidden ourselves somewhere safe. And so he had some guided meditations that he used to help us track back in our memory and try to discover where that might have been. We all did this individually. There were 6 or 8 of us there. And in my case, I went back to when I was 3.5 years old. I woke from my nap and it seemed like nobody was in the house. I went around looking for my mom, primarily, or my dad, but mostly for my mom. Couldn't find anybody. I might have been yelling or crying or whatever, because pretty soon my next younger brother, who's 2 years younger than me, came out, and I have memories of him toddling around in his diaper following me, and I couldn't find anybody anywhere. And I came to find out later on that was the day that my next younger brother was born, and my mom and dad were at the hospital. And my dad's sister, who lived a short distance away, was to have come over and been there, but for whatever reason she wasn't. Well, I was terrified. I didn't know why nobody was there. I didn't know what to do. My survival strategy that I chose at that time was to go climb into my toy box. It was an Army footlocker. My dad was still in the Army. And get in there with my favorite stuffed bunny that I dragged around by its ears a lot of times. My mom had to sew the ears back on many times. Get back in there and pull the lid down. I don't have a memory of when I came out, but I recognize that when I came out, I left myself in there. The only place that I believed to be safe. The world out here was unpredictable, often unsafe, scary. Myself was in there with my bunny and my other toys, and it was safe. Now, that wasn't a conscious process by any means. That was purely way down subconscious. But later on, well, as the remaining part of the workshop, I went back and processed some of that, and I've thought about it many times and reconstructed various parts. So that's an example of leaving myself, because until that workshop, from the age of 3.5, and I'd been in recovery a few years, so I'm going to say this is going on 45 years. I've been wandering around in the world without myself. Now, if that sounds scary, then you have some idea what life was like for me up to that point. And I am incredibly grateful to Fred and to all the other people who were in that workshop, and to God for leading me to that, because my life changed. And I'll have another example of the rewards of that. Well, heck, I'll just say it now. I'll just mention that my mother died in January. I live in Dallas. She was in a facility in Berkeley, California. No, in Oakland. My brother, my next younger brother, lives out there in Berkeley, fairly close, and he was keeping an eye on her. But he needed to leave town and asked me if I'd come to town, stay in his house, but go check on Mom every day and keep an eye on things. So I did. Well, over the weekend, while he was gone, she died. Unexpectedly. We knew she wasn't healthy, but it didn't seem to be an imminent danger. No imminent threat of passing. But I got a call at 6:15 Monday morning. Sorry to let you know that your mother died in her sleep last night. That's a hell of a wake-up call. I was sound asleep. That was a shock. So my sister was coming in the middle of the week. My brother wasn't coming back till the following weekend. I was there by myself for a few days, just trying to stay in touch by phone and figure out how to go through the motions and do whatever needed to be done, but really there by myself. And I noticed as I did that it wasn't scary. I felt okay. I was shocked and surprised when she passed, but what I recognized that I was actually good company for myself. I actually appreciated myself being there because I could figure out what to do. I could notice what I was feeling and respond. So that is, to me, is evidence of the benefits of recovery. I mean, I can't imagine how I would have reacted without any of this recovery experience and that put in that same situation. I'd have been going crazy. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So a lot of good things happened here in Dallas. Here I am in Phoenix. A lot of good things happened while I was still living here in Phoenix. One of them was, there's a couple named Barb and Curly Monroe that did a 10-week series Wednesday night at one of the churches in town in northern part of Phoenix, where they talked about relationships. You know, they'd get up there and tag team, and they'd talk about things that come up in relationships and why they come up and what needs to change to be able to deal with them, and gave examples of their experience and how they worked through it all. And we just sat there and just soaked it all up because we could relate to just about everything they said, having had a lot of those same problems. And so that was very important to us. And then the other thing that was important being here in Phoenix is that we got access to a lot of out-of-town speakers that would come in. People like John Bradshaw, Terry Kellogg, of course Pia Melody wasn't really out of town, and out in Wickenburg. Melody Beattie, John Lee, Bob Earl, Ken and Mary weren't really out of town, but noted people that we had already seen some of John Bradshaw's series on PBS, starting with On the Family, and again, just soaked in all of that information. I mean, it was like fresh, new information, but I could then compare it back to my life and validate it, my own experience. And sometime after that series was first on PBS, a good friend of ours got a copy of the tapes and a discussion guide workbook. And so a number of us got together once a week at a friend's house, and we watched that tape, and then we sat there and using the discussion guide, we discussed among us. There were 3 or 4 couples there, and just sharing with each other. That was a huge, tremendously beneficial experience. It helped my wife and myself not only to grow as individuals, but to understand ourselves and how the things that some of our baggage was affecting our relationship, and being able to untangle some of life, so that and get that negative part of the pie chart of the brain resources, get that pushed down to leave a little bit more excess to learn new things and grow and change. Let's see. Some of them came and made individual visits. Some of them came to CODA meetings, were speakers. The other thing that probably still takes place is a U.S. Journal Conference in the fall. Back then they were having it out at the Princess Hotel every fall, and there would be this long list of noted people in the recovery field that would come and give talks and do workshops, and we got to listen to a lot of them and meet with several of them and talk with several of them. One of the things was, we had the money then, so we could pay for some of that, because I wasn't drinking. I wasn't drinking away all the money that we were then able to spend to go to some of those, even though they cost money. But a lot of them were free. So, in 1993, we moved to Dallas. My job changed, and continued to do as much of this as we could in Dallas, but there didn't seem to be nearly as much available. My experience was that the recovery energy was different there. I was still attending both AA and CODA, and it just the tone in meetings, in the AA meetings, was a little different than I was used to. And in CODA, there were hardly any men present then, very few men. And I had a judgment about Texas anyway. My wife is from Texas, her family's from Texas. And I had a judgment about Texas from all the way back in high school, because I was living in Colorado Springs, and these Texas oil men were coming up there and buying our mountains to build ski resorts on, and things like that. That was back in the 50s and 60s. So, and then when I went back there in the 70s, even more of it. So I just had long-time judgments about Texas. So that was a strike against my wife when I met her. But we would still go from wherever we were, either in Phoenix or in Colorado Springs for a while, and then in Phoenix. We'd go visit her family. And on the way back to wherever we were living, I'd say, I enjoyed visiting with your family, and it's fine to go to Texas to visit your family, but I don't ever want to live there. I'll never go there. Well, I've learned never to say never. That was one of the biggest ones for me, because we've been there 23 years now. And it's been a good thing for my wife to be close to her family, and I've enjoyed it as well. But again, it took a while to find and develop the same kind of family in recovery that I'd found in Phoenix, that I'd developed in Phoenix. But it's come along, and it just took a little longer, I guess. Now, when I was, just before I left Phoenix, I had about 6.5 years of recovery, and I decided before I moved away, I wanted to confront my dad. I felt that I had processed enough anger and shame that I could sit down and look him in the eye and tell him objectively why I had stayed away from him so much since I got married. I mean, my wife and I eloped and just didn't tell him we were going, and then didn't go around the house much at all. And I told him that it was because of his extreme punishments. I felt like, it just hurt me a lot, and I just wanted to stay away. And he said, well, there were times when I thought, or somebody told me, that it might have gone too far. But he said, but then I just remembered it was all for your own good. So I could see that was his story, and he was sticking to it, and it was never going to change. So checked that one off the list and went away and just accepted him that way. And but anyway, I needed to do that, whatever the outcome was, and it was significant. Let's see. Now, a little bit more about my mom's passing. Being there over the weekend with her. My brother often went over, got Mom dressed up, took her to church on Sunday morning, went out to lunch, brought her back. Well, I wasn't that enthusiastic. I was just there for the weekend, so I said, well, I'll come over and meet with you, and we'll just go to the chapel service there at the facility. There's a minister that comes in and has a service every Sunday morning. And they have quite a nice chapel there. So we went down there, and it was nice. The minister in his program printed a number of scriptures that he had set up with different members of the congregation to get up and read to everybody. And one of those scriptures was very, very impactful to me. It was from Corinthians, and so Paul was writing to the Christians there in Corinth. He was saying that things along the lines that, that there are a lot of different things that people do that seem to be serving God, whether through healings or works of various kinds, or whether it's by teaching and talking. And it went through a whole list of things. But I thought, but the bottom line is that even though they look different, they all come from the same God, and just different aspects, different ways. Well, that was significant to me because my mom and dad went to church faithfully. Dad sang in the choir, Mom played the organ, and we don't generally go to the Air Force Chapel on the base wherever my dad was stationed, and we'd be there and go to Sunday school and go to Bible school in the summer and a lot of this stuff. But after I got to be some general age of mental, individuality, I realized that was all going on at church and none of it was going on at home. And I just thought that it was irrelevant. I discounted it, and I said, I don't believe all that stuff. People are doing all this, but it just seemed false and hollow based on my experience at home. So as time went along, I became an agnostic, but I was so egotistical I thought I was an atheist, if that makes any sense. But I got into recovery, and that all changed gradually. Not like that, but it did. I became aware that there was a higher power that had been doing things for me all my life that I didn't understand or know. And if I really, as I thought about it, it was happening on a daily basis. So I could no longer deny that. If I wanted to be real and honest, I had to acknowledge that and give credit where credit was due, because things were happening that I couldn't make happen. So then I embarked on trying to increase and improve my understanding of God and of a higher power. So without going through a lot of detail there, when I get back to this service with my mom sitting next to me, when that was read and I was reading along, it just hit me right where I live, because I thought, some of that's talking about me. That's what I'm doing in 12-step work, in sharing and in sponsoring. And people had said to me at various times, gee, I really like the way you explain things, the way you help me understand it. And I mentioned to somebody one time, I'm surprised that people say that to me, because I'm not trying to do anything special, but it seems to come out well. And the person just said, well, you're a messenger. And I thought, well, I didn't plan to be a messenger. I didn't know I was a messenger, but okay, if you say so, I can accept that, and we'll see how it plays out. I'll consider that a possibility. So going along, I've just kind of continued doing what I do, and I've kind of become more comfortable with that label, if you will, that as a role in my life, one of multiple roles. So it's just important to me to continue that. And so going back to this church service with my mother, she's sitting right next to me, and I thought, yeah, I'm doing what that scripture said, what Paul was writing about there. And I felt like it reconciled my life path and choices with what my mom would have wanted. Now, I never said anything to her about it, and she didn't say anything about it to me. But later on, after she passed, I thought, she may well have felt that I was feeling that. I know that kind of thing is possible and happens sometimes. I can't speak for her. I'll never know for sure, because she didn't say anything about it. But that's one possibility that is meaningful to me. I think I was talking with my siblings and other people about why she would have died when she died, when none of their conditions seemed to be the kind of thing that would cause her to die quickly, imminently. And we got to looking back at the fact that her sister, who was 11 or 12 years old, had at the age of 104, had just died in December. And let's see, other of my siblings had been there to visit, one at Thanksgiving, one at Christmas, and the other one was coming that week. And I was sort of the last one to get there. And maybe but the fact that I was present, she might have had some notion of things coming together, and that might have been significant to her. And if she felt what I felt about hearing the scripture, that might also have contributed to some sense of completion for her. I'm just speculating. These are things that I wouldn't have even imagined in my past life, but the kind of things I've heard about in recovery make it seem possible. And I like to think that with those possibilities, she just felt like, and she was struggling, hard for her to talk, hard for her to eat. Now that I look back at it even more, I see she actually had pretty much stopped eating. And I know from my wife's experience with her mom that that's a sign that she's about ready to check out. I didn't recognize it at the time, but she would try to eat stuff and then just spit it out. So anyway, enough details about that. It was just, so the final thing. In the days right afterwards, I started noticing a new feeling. And I didn't recognize it or understand it at first. And then when I did recognize it, I thought it was love. And I became sure that, yes, this is love. But I thought, how strange. I've never felt a connection with my mother before. Never felt really any attachment. And then I realized, now she's dead, it was safe to love her. It wasn't safe when she was alive. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but when I acted on loving her when she was alive, I got hurt, disappointed in some way. And now it was safe. It was okay for me to acknowledge that I loved her. There was no danger. And I was glad to feel it. I'm glad to know it. And I wish I could have known it before. But I couldn't go back and, worry about the past. I was just glad to have that recognition then. So, the last page of my notes. And then we'll have time if anybody has any comments or questions. Through all this whole thing, the world started to make sense to me. When I read or heard quotations from well-known people, they started to make sense. I believed I could understand what they meant sometimes. Things that I'd heard before and didn't understand, but now they were starting to make sense to me. They could fit them into a context in recovery. And part of that was I started to feel like I belong here. Like I have a place in the world, in CODA, in recovery, and in this conference. So one of the beliefs, some things, I put a couple things together that I heard from other people. One of them is one of the key differences between humans and animals, or other mammals, for example, is that humans have the ability to learn and grow and change. And I thought, that sounds like a fairly good criterion for being human to me. It makes sense to me. And as long as I'm alive, I want to continue to do that. I mean, that's part of why I'm in CODA after 30 years. Believe me, I'm not cured by any means, but I still continue to feel like I'm gaining benefits from this experience and learning more things about myself. Well, then I heard another fellow say, when death finds me, may it find me alive. Now, some of the chuckles suggest that maybe that's meaningful to you too. But I thought, how profound. I have known and associated with a lot of people who, while they're walking around on their own 2 feet, really seemed to be dead. They just were not really present. Blank looks in their eyes and so forth. Not really being aware of what's going on. So I thought, I want to continue to learn and grow and change as long as I'm alive. And I don't have to be able to walk around to do that. If I'm in a wheelchair like Stephen Hawking or anything else that one might imagine, as long as I'm drawing breath, I want to still be learning and growing. That's my purpose today. So it feels very important to me to be here with you. And it's not because I'm important to anyone else or I'm important to CODA, but just to share my gratitude and joy with you and about being alive and learning to live. And I also accept that I am important to some people. Not more important than them, but equally worthy. I think I've come to a very much different understanding of humility than I had before all this experience. And I think it's really about accepting credit when it's deserved and knowing that sometimes I might deserve credit for something. And there's a lot of things that I don't do, and I'm just another human being walking around on the planet, finding his way the best I can, and just accepting what life brings. So, the important people in my life, of course, my family members, my mom and dad both having passed away, and one of my brothers has passed away, but I still have two brothers and a sister, and my sister's 13 years younger. She was the baby of the family, and all the ones in between she complains they mistreated her. She's so much younger than me that I was married and out of the household by the time she got old enough for me to even think about trying to do much with. But I'm her hero. Doesn't mean she doesn't have any other heroes, but I'm her hero today. She loves hearing from me and talking with me, and I enjoy talking with her and letting her know that I accept her and love her. And so I talked about roles as a messenger, but my primary role is just to be the best me that I can understand how to be true to myself and how to take care of myself. It's important to me to be a good husband and be not only loving but supportive and helpful and encouraging. And it's important to me to be a good father. Now, one of the things so I have two children. I have a son who is now 53 and a daughter who's 50. And my son lives near Vail. He went to graduate school, got a double degree, and then decided he wanted to go up there for one semester and take a break, and we knew once he got up there he'd never come back, and he didn't. So he doesn't have an 8 to 5 regular job. He tried that, and he called my wife one day and says, "I'm here working at the bank, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm seeing these people on the ski slopes, and I can't take it. I got to quit this job and get out there." So today, he is the most requested private ski instructor at Beaver Creek, and he also instructs their new instructors at the beginning of each season. So he's an example of when you do what you like, what you love, you'll do it well. He's just floated like cream to the top. He does the same thing with Scouts. He worked with they don't have any children, but he became a sort of big brother to one kid who wanted to be a Cub Scout. And their Cub Scout pack leader had moved away, so he took over that, built the Cub Scout pack up, and then later moved on to the Boy Scouts. And now he's the Boy Scout troop leader there. And this last year, the district chairman from out in Grand Junction came to their award ceremony when the Scouts were getting awards, and gave him an award that he created, a recognition he created for himself that he's only given out to one other person. And he gave this award to my son for his outstanding service to the scouting program. He gives himself to those kids, and he cares about them, and he just gets involved, and also he attracts a lot of support, and it's a remarkable thing. He also was involved in a program where he got some training in counseling for leadership. Well, now he's taken and extracted some of that, and he's put together material that he teaches in the public high schools, in their social studies or civics classes, or to their student government group. And last year, not this immediate past year, the one before, one of those groups of seniors invited him to come and be the keynote speaker at their graduation. I thought, wow, they're getting it. Whatever he has to say, they're appreciating and enjoying, and they like it, and they wanted him to come and speak to their graduation ceremony. I thought, what an honor. I not only love him, I admire him as a man. I've come to see him not so much as my son. We still have a special relationship there. But, I'm really grateful for him and the happiness and the satisfaction he gets and the contribution that he makes to the community. And he's just chosen to do what he loves, and when he does it goes very well. So I just have a lot of love and special feelings for him. My daughter still has problems. She hasn't, well, I have a lot of judgments. But she really, I'll just say what I think, hasn't chosen to take responsibility for herself. And unfortunately, she has a 17-year-old son, my grandson, who my wife and I spend a lot of time with and try to share and give as much to as we can from a support standpoint. And so our daughter's situation is very painful to us. So in terms of the joy we feel about our son, we feel a lot of pain about our daughter. And it's very kind of ironic, but on the other hand, when I look at my daughter and listen to her, I think it's my dad all over again. And I know where she got it. She came by it honestly. But she just hasn't made the choice along the way to follow my wife's and my path of recovery. So I understand that I can't change her. All I can do is always let her know that I love her and support her, and hope and pray that she will have a change of heart and a change of mind somewhere along the way, and try to do what we can for our grandson. So that's life today. I get a lot of joy out of being involved in CODA, and whether it's one-on-one with people or with a group or just sharing in a group, CODA is very meaningful to me, and as I said, I just keep learning things about myself all the time. So I appreciate you being here to hear me. I talked a little bit longer than I thought I would. I wanted to allow a little bit more time, but I certainly will entertain any comments or questions anybody has. If anything I said was confusing, or if there's any response or helpful comments you want to offer. Yes. Oh, I'll stand up here.
You made the comment that love is either there or not. Can you explain that a little more? Because I think of love as a decision.
Okay, the question is about love. Said I'd made the comment that love is either there or not, and she thinks of love as a decision. And I don't believe that I decide what to feel. But when I feel something, it's my responsibility to choose how to act on that, or how to respond to that feeling. So my belief is that I do feel love, and now I choose what to do with it. So that's my behavior. And I don't know, it works for me. The choices that I make, the decisions, are how to express that love. First of all, acknowledge it for myself, and then how to express it to the people that I love. So, did you have?
Yeah, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I thought it was interesting in the beginning where you mentioned that alcoholism is a symptom, not a disease, because when I first began in my recovery, there was a lot of claim about it being a disease rather than just a problem. So now is there another step that they're working on?
Well, so yeah, I'm familiar with the disease concept of addiction. And I think the real disease is codependence. And I think of alcoholism, drug addiction, sex addiction, gambling, whatever, all the ANDA, are acting out of the codependence. They're acting out behaviors. And I didn't bring it with me. Some people may be familiar with an iceberg. There's an iceberg concept that was in a book published by the Friels in the mid-'80s about adult children of alcoholics. And the iceberg at the waterline, what we see above the waterline are all the points of the iceberg, and they've labeled those with all the addictions and obsessive compulsive behaviors and so on. The first layer below the waterline they've labeled as codependency. The next layer below that is guilt. The next layer below that is shame. And down at the very bottom of the iceberg is fear of abandonment, which is the fundamental fear of all humans, the deepest fear. So the reason that all that stuff is down there in the bottom, the underwater part of the iceberg, and the part that we don't see, by the way, because it's below the waterline in this idiom, in this figure, is that our families, my family, a dysfunctional family, did not equip me to deal with that. And so this codependency is a layer of thoughts and behaviors and survival techniques and all those adaptations I have made in order to survive life in the world, in spite of all that crap that's down there roiling around and being down there and unresolved. So that's the real disease. I mean, that's the feeling, and then the codependency is really the disease that keeps that all from being resolved. And because I can't fully contain it all, I act out as an addict. And that's the part that gets seen publicly, above the waterline. So that iceberg concept is very meaningful to me. And I wish I'd remembered to bring the diagram. But the book is called Adult Children of Alcoholics, and it was published by, I think it's David and Nancy Friel, Friele, in about 1986. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Sure. Okay, so all these, every kind of addiction you can think of, and obsessive compulsive behaviors, those are all acting out behaviors. The first layer below the waterline is a codependency. Below that is guilt, below that is shame, and below that is fear of abandonment, down at the bottom of the iceberg. Thank you for your presence. Thanks for listening.